Good morning, everyone. This is Backgarden Reads. This is Kieran. First things first is I've been away for a while. Lots of things have happened. Lots of family drama and just life. So I didn't really have time to come and do this. One other thing is that I did try to do other things on the channel, like doing poetry shorts and doing a little bit of readings of older books, but older stories rather. But I found that the first one, the poetry shorts, to be a bit not exactly something I fully enjoyed, and doing the sort of audiobooks were also something that I didn't quite enjoy, mostly because it was a lot more work than I expected. Right? You do something and you think it's going to be easy, but then you actually do it and you're like, wow, how do people even do this? It takes a long time. How do people even read like Lord of the Rings with the entirety of Lord of the Rings? How do people read that entirety of that for an audiobook and it only be that long? And it probably takes like 4 to 6 times longer to actually record all that, because there's going to be different takes and different mess ups and all that, and then editing all that down is also crazy. But I think what I'm going to do as well with at least the reviews is that I'm going to do a bit of a monthly roundup instead of what I was doing before, which is I just do it once a week, one book a week or one book every couple days. I'll just do an entire roundup, get all the books in one go, and just edit that down, put it out, and just do that every month. One other thing is just that one other reason why I haven't been uploading is that I just haven't been reading that much, and again, because of family stuff and life and all that, something I don't really want to get into. But one thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to link my Substack. It's mostly in the description, and it's mostly just haikus and stuff. Eventually I'll put in some short stories. I'm kind of working up to that. It's all a bit in the air for that. One thing you'll definitely hear is that you'll hear all the beeping and sirens and all that around me. That's because there is these little stakes into the ground where they send like a vibration or something throughout the ground to stop gophers from digging into the soil and just fucking up plants, right? Because that's just a real hassle. So just keep that in mind in future. So yeah, the first book in the monthly roundup I'm going to talk about is Dark Future by Jack Yeovil. First, you'll see that it has Elvis Presley, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's also a helicopter, like an attack helicopter with the painted like the Confederate flag. Now, what this book is sci-fi, right? Fantasy, alternative future, and cyberpunk. It's kind of all of that rolled into one. Yeah. It's published by GW Publishing, right? GW Books, which, for those who don't know, GW is Games Workshop, or as it's now known as Warhammer. Yes, this is published by the people who made the Warhammer 40k and Warhammer Fantasy. And this is one of the first bunch of books that was published when they started publishing books. This was published in 1991, and the story is set in the far-off future of 1998 in an alternative timeline where several things happened, and there's also like magic, shamanism, kind of demons, evil outer gods, supernatural things, mutants, like drugs that lengthen the lifespan or the youth of a person, hence why Elvis Presley looks a little younger than he should be. A little young. And this is part of the alternative future, is that Elvis Presley, because of one thing or another, had to go back into the military instead of pursuing his music career. And he ends up being a colonel. Another thing that happens is that rock pretty much just gets outlawed by President Nixon. That's also one of the things that's changed. John Kennedy was failed to become president because of the exposing of his affair with Marilyn Monroe, and that led to Nixon's victory. Nixon outlawed, in this alternative universe, Nixon outlawed rock and roll because of a very deadly riot which killed off a lot of early rock and roll, like musicians and music bands, right? And then from there, the space program launched earlier than usual, much more reckless. A lot more people died. Neil Armstrong never went to the moon. They set up a satellite array where the satellites just shoot down laser beams onto the ground. It's a weapons system, basically, and it's a weapon system that hasn't been in use in over 30 years because the space program was shut down about 20 years before the events of the story. You'll see that in the prologue of the book. And this is the second book in a trilogy where the main character of the trilogy is Crocodile. Not the drug, but a person. It's a kind of a code name, where she hires Elvis Presley to go to Cape Canaveral to just wreck the evil plans of this supernatural culty religion that's kind of like mock Mormonism. No, not really. It's kind of hard to really pin down what the religion is, but it's a religion in world where they have these genetically they modify some of their believers into these kind of soldiers, right? That are brainwashed and altered and look all plasticky and all that fake, like the very stereotypical happy-go-lucky 50s family, right? But it's only the wife and husband, the husband and wife, and they're like, to stop them and their evil plans to using the weapons array to just wreak havoc on the world, kill like targets of the Vatican, of the super tech conglomerate that just basically rules the world. Well, not rules the world, but it's the entirety of Japan. Yeah, and all sorts of things. It could do a lot of damage. There's a lot of supernatural and magical-ish elements in it. Well, not that many, but it's enough to get across that. Yeah, to get across the tone. One thing in here is also mutants, specifically the suitcase people, which are mutated crocodilian reptile people, right? People have been mutated to be like that. One such thing is a character called Raimundo. He's very minor, right, Raimundo, and he's like a kind of a stereotypical Mexican gang member, kind of in the way he speaks anyway. And that's actually one thing that I kind of dislike is how some of the characters, like how it's written anyway, is how some of the characters the way they write it is they actually write out how they would say it. They don't just write in the thick Spanish accent, you know. They don't say in a thick Spanish accent and then get your brain to do all the work for that, but they actually write it all out, which can be a bit annoying, but it's not that bad, really. But it's a short, punchy story that I honestly, like, if it's in print and you can find it, which I honestly highly doubt, because, well, I'll get back to that. If it's in print and you can find it, it's a very good read. It's not that long. It's a little over 200 pages, right? And some of those pages there's only like there's 4 pages which have illustrations like so. And that's one of the bad guys in the book. He's also a point of view in the book. Pretty interesting, because there is it bounces between multiple points of view. The main ones being Elvis Presley and the villain, right? I forgot the villain's name, and because it's been a few days since I finished reading this. But anyway, to get back to it, this was originally part of an RPG system that Games Workshop was trying to make, but it never really got popular, and which is a shame because I find the story is really good. And it never got popular, and instead it doubled down into 40k, and there's so much Warhammer 40k. I mean, like, one of the longest book series is the Heresy series, which is like 50 books long, which is insane. Insane to think of because, boy, I don't think I could review all those books. I mean, that's just insane. That's just too many. But it is a shame that this hasn't. That they kind of abandoned this, because this is a fun alternative take. This is like Mad Max. Yeah, it has that like similarities of Mad Max, some mutants, like cult. It feels like, in some ways, it feels kind of. It feels like. I can't really. I'm sorry, forgive me. I can't really get my mind together, but it's a very interesting premise of the series, and again, is really not many books in it because it was cancelled because there just wasn't that much interest in it, which is again a shame. But if you can find this, if it's on sale, I don't know, I would give it a read. And for those that like Warhammer 40k, for those that like Warhammer Fantasy, for those who like that sort of thing, I think honestly this would be up your alley. Especially if you like the more like on the ground, like on the ground conflicts, right? But I would totally recommend this. But it's very unlikely to well, be in print. Ugh. Okay, for my next book, it's going to be a literary classic by the legendary author Ernest Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. This is the Scribner Classic Collier books. This is, I'm not sure when this was published, but it doesn't matter because it's not really because that's not really the important bit. But this book, it's a very short book. Yeah, it's about 120 pages long. You could read that in a day rather easily. And I kind of like short books. I find that short books, especially really good short books, well written anyway, they can densely pack the whole thing with meaning and story and character, and just like, if done well, it can be an amazing read that you can do multiple times. But in the case of Ernest Hemingway, I would say, at least for short books, he would be the gold standard, at least for The Old Man and the Sea. It follows a man. There's no names given throughout the book, unless it's the old man who is referencing another character, usually, or a person, like a baseball player, and it's in Cuba, and it's following a fisherman in Cuba as he goes out to sea, catch a big old fish to bring back. And it's a very different book to what most people would usually read, usually being fantasy and epic fantasy and all that, and sci-fi. I would recommend this because it feels like a grand story, but very personal. And I would say, in some ways, it makes me think of like when you see those videos or like interviews of people, like older people, on like their regrets, their work, like their past, their regrets, their hopes, their dreams, their pride in things. And it makes me think of that. More specifically, it makes me think of the rendition by Johnny Cash of the Hurt, and it's a very beautiful song, and reading this, it makes me think of the song. And I think in many ways it also reflects, I think it might also reflect the author himself. You can see, as you read through it, there's this conflict between the old man and just him trying to make something of his catch of trying to just get something with having gone like 80 days, a little over 80 days, having caught nothing. And then it goes through this then he goes through this 2 days of trying to wrangle this massive fish, and it's like this battle, this tug of war between them, his respect for the animal and the ocean and the creatures in it, and it has a lot of the appreciable nature. You can kind of picture a lot of the sea, and you can feel the sadness and the reluctance and the annoyance, and you can just understand the character. It's really well done. And I think I can completely understand why a lot of people really love Ernest Hemingway just from reading this. This is one of his best books, and I would just totally recommend it. There's a lot shorter review than the previous book, but then again, this is a short book, and I think it's definitely worth a read. Okay, so my next book is actually going to be 2 books, which is actually technically 4 books. Now, what I mean by this is that I am doing the Book of the New Sun by Wolfe, right? The Tor Essentials version. The first being Shadow and Claw, the second being Sword and Citadel. What I can say about this book series is that it is a much more challenging read as genre fiction goes. Much more challenging. At least through these 2 books. Or technically 4. The first book, right, Shadow and Claw, is 2 books of the quadrilogy, or the saga, or the tetralogy, depending on how you say it. The first one is the Shadow of the Torturer. The second one is the Claw of the Conciliator. The next one is the Sword of the Lictor, and the Citadel of the Autarch. It's hard to fully describe this book, or this book series. It's a story. It's a series of stories about stories, where it's mainly told in the perspective of the main character, Severian, who in the first book reveals that he is the Autarch, but he begins the story as a torturer of the Guild of Torturers, which also double as executioners. This is a legendary series of sci-fi, right? It is, if you really want to challenge yourself and you really want to go for sci-fi that is a bit more like philosophical in a way, a bit more challenging, really, where it gets you to think a bit more deeply about the story itself and about stories in general. The Book of the New Sun is kind of ideal for that. I know I've already done the review for Shadow and Claw. I know I have. But this, and so technically this is a re-review, in a way. Because I'm adding this with the Sword and Citadel book that I got. It really gets you to think about the stories that are being told in the book, and that the book itself is a story. It's kind of meta in that way. if you understand what that means. A meta being, it's a story about reference. It's like a story referencing that is a story, making commentary about a story. I don't know if that makes any sense, but when you start to notice some things in the books, right? Like in the first one, there is a retelling of the myth of the Argonauts, a Greek myth, and you don't know it at first until the end of that story within the book, that it's the Argonauts, right? Jason and the Argonauts. And then once you understand that that's a story that's referencing another story, you then go forward having to think a bit more deeply about what you're reading. In this one particularly, there is a retelling of the story of Romulus and Remus, which is, like the founding of Rome, the brothers being raised by wolves and the Remus being killed. It's a retelling of that, and once you understand that, and I only got that because I already knew the myth. Now there are probably others. There are definitely other stories in the book that happen that I think you gain a bigger appreciation of it if you knew classical mythology, of Greek mythology, of Roman stuff, right? It's part of the genre of the Dying Earth, which is Jack Vance, which was really coined by Jack Vance, but it was started before Jack Vance by I think the most definitive start was with Clark Ashton Smith, right? With his story of the Dark Eidolon, which is the final cycle of the Earth, in which there's lots of cycles. It goes and repeats and all that, and the last cycle is, I think, Zofik, and the continent of Zofik with the Dark Eidolon. But with the Dying Earth, there is a sort of melancholy with it, a sort of this malaise that the world is going to end, that there are things going on in the world that are very unfortunate, and most people can't do anything about that, and there is a sort of bucking of the usual order of things, right? And in this, there's tyranny and strange idea of time travel, where it's not really time travel as we know it, but it gets you to think more about time, and I'm sorry, it's hard to think of, it's hard to describe, and it's very challenging because it really gets you to think about the book, the story that's being told, the stories within the stories, and the author of the in novel story, because it's being told by Severian. I know I've already said that. And one thing that is very interesting to think about at the very end of the book of Sword and Citadel. It highlights the fact that not all stories end with very story-like endings, and it makes a purpose of highlighting that. And at the very end, it even gets you to go. It even asks you, "Hey, you should read this again." Right? Oh, maybe you should read this again to get a bit more context, which is a very interesting thing, because most people will read a book once, right? And they'll only get one reading out of it, and just leave it at that. But there is a lot of value in rereading a book. And in this case, I definitely actually want to reread the two books that I have here, right? These two books. Because I actually want to kind of piece together what's going on. Now, there is one point of criticism, there is one point of thing that I have to say, not exactly criticism, but it's commentary on the books, in that not everything, that you have to be kind of careful what you read into what's being written down, because it could mean one thing, right? Or it could just mean the literal thing that's going on, and it's that. And as I think about it, I think this requires, if you really want to actually enjoy, like, you can definitely enjoy it with one read, but if you want to get a true appreciation of the Book of the New Sun, you kind of have to read it at least a second time. Read it at least a second time. You can get new understanding of a story, or a new appreciation of a book, or a scenario, a film, or TV show, or whatever. You can gain a new appreciation of it when you rewatch it. Like how reading Dune, you can get the surface level ideas that of like a hero's journey and all that, but then you can get the interpretation of the author, which is a thing against Messiah, the Messiah complex. Be wary of these leaders. But then something deeper still, it's about growing up, right? It is becoming an adult, becoming a man. It is having to take responsibility for your actions, for taking responsibility of things of understanding that there are things that are beyond your control, and that there is an acceptance of responsibility. I know I've repeated that several times, but you can gain a lot from the book Dune if you read it multiple times. There's multiple layers to it, and that's actually fantastic bit of writing, right? Absolutely fantastic. Some of it wasn't intentional, but whatever. And so I think the Book of the New Sun is also one of those sets of books that, to get a full appreciation of it, you need to read it multiple times. At least once. At least a second time. Read it a second time, right? And oh god, my brain. I know I'm going to do something a bit more in depth on the whole dying Earth, because I think there could be something to say about it that I'm not sure that I'm pretty sure some people have done, have connected and done, but it's something that I feel like I want to put forth myself. But first, I have to research quite a few books that are part of that I would consider part of the new sun of the not the new sun the kind of dying earth genre, and it's not going to be just books, but it's going to be other things as well. But yeah, and this is something that, but to return back to the Book of the New Sun, I would say if if you've gotten into reading sci-fi or fantasy in recent years and you want something that's a bit more challenging than what you usually read, you could not go wrong with these books. However, you have to go at it with an idea that you are going to have to challenge it. You're going to have to engage your brain a little bit more with what you're reading than you might otherwise usually do. So keep that in mind if you want to read it. But otherwise, it's fantastic. And there we go. Now, moving on, I don't think I'm really going to do narrations in the future. I'm not sure, actually. I might do, but I won't do them as frequently as I was doing. And if I do, I think it's more likely going to be like of short stories. It's going to continually be short stories. I can't do full books. That's too much. I might continue doing the poetry shorts, but honestly, they don't really stick for me that much. As in something that I'm that in love with. I think if I was to do it, I think I would go a little bit more in depth with the poetry that I'm reading and like with the poets, right? Like some of the World War poetry of Rudyard Kipling was like World War One poetry of Rudyard Kipling is the same guy who wrote the Jungle Book, right? Go a little bit more into depth into that, but that's what it is. But I'm saying but a lot. I'm saying a lot of words I probably shouldn't be saying because it's filler, really. But anyway, I do have a Substack. I definitely referenced it earlier, or maybe I don't know. I have a Substack. Again, it's mostly just haikus. Mostly just haikus. I will be putting stuff up there eventually. I think I might do a second Substack as well, where I write stories, like more genre-focused stories, because I think I want to, I kind of want to write both, but I want to kind of separate them a little bit with the literary stuff and the more literary stuff and the poetry stuff and the haikus and whatever would be on one Substack, and the fiction and the genre stuff will be on another. Now, I think I won't put up links for it actually until I get a few more stories on the Substacks or Substack in just in general, because how can I advertise something or put something out there unless I have something there? but that's going to be a little bit later down the line. So look forward to that, or don't. I will be doing a few more in-depth videos with specific genres in future. I will certainly do more monthly reviews of all the books I read, because I feel like that's a little less hassle for me. I can just edit this throughout the whole thing and then just put it out. So I bid you adieu.